Chapter 25. The Raid. He went consenting, or else he was no king. It was no one's place to say to him, "It is time to make the offering." Mary Renault. The king must die. As things turned out, Hazel and Pipkin did not come back to the honeycomb until the evening. They were still feeding in the field when it came on to rain, with a cold wind, and they took shelter first in the nearby ditch, and then, since the ditch was on a slope and had a fair flow of rainwater in about 10 minutes, among some sheds halfway down the lane. They burrowed into a thick pile of straw, and for some time remained listening for rats. But all was quiet, and they grew drowsy and fell asleep, while outside the rain settled in for the morning. When they woke, it was mid-afternoon and still drizzling. It seemed to Hazel that there was no particular hurry. The going would be troublesome in the wet, and anyway, no self-respecting rabbit could leave without a forage round the sheds. A pile of mangels and swedes occupied them for some time, and they set out only when the light was beginning to fade. They took their time and reached the hangar a little before dark, with nothing worse to trouble than the discomfort of soaking wet fur. Only 2 or 3 of the rabbits were out to a rather subdued sylphlay in the wet. No one remarked on their absence, and Hazel went underground at once, telling Pipkin to say nothing about their adventure for the time being. He found his burrow empty, lay down, and fell asleep. Waking, he found Fiver beside him, as usual. It was some time before dawn. The earth floor felt pleasantly dry and snug, and he was about to go back to sleep when Fiver spoke. "You've been wet through, Hazel." "Well, what about it?" "The grass is wet, you know." "You didn't get so wet on Sylphley. You were soaked. You weren't here at all yesterday, were you?" "Oh, I went foraging down the hill." "Eating swedes, and your feet smell of farmyard, hens' droppings and bran. But there's some other funny thing besides. Something I can't smell." "What happened?" "Well, I had a bit of a brush with a cat, but why worry?" "Because you're concealing something, Hazel. Something dangerous." "It's Holly that's in danger, not I. Why bother me?" "Holly?" replied Fiver in surprise. "But Holly and the others reached the big warren early yesterday evening. Ihar told us. You mean to say you didn't know?" Hazel felt fairly caught out. "Well, I know now," he replied. "I'm glad to hear it." "So it comes to this," said Fiver. "You went to a farm yesterday and escaped from a cat. And whatever you were up to, it was so much on your mind that you forgot to ask about Holly last night." "Well, all right, Fiver. I'll tell you all about it. I took Pipkin and went to that farm that Kihar told us about, where there are rabbits in a hutch. I found the rabbits and talked to them, and I've taken a notion to go back one night and get them out, to come and join us here." "What for?" "Well, 2 of them are does, that's what for." "But if Holly's successful, we shall soon have plenty of does. And from all I've ever heard of hutch rabbits, they don't take easily to wild life. The truth is, you're just a silly show-off." "A silly show-off," said Hazel. "Well, we'll just see whether Bigwig and Blackberry think so." "Risking your life and other rabbits' lives for something that's of little or no value to us," said Fiver. "Oh, yes, of course the others will go with you. You're their chief rabbit. You are supposed to decide what's sensible, and they trust you. Persuading them will prove nothing. 3 or 4 dead rabbits will prove you're a fool when it's too late. Oh, be quiet, answered Hazel. I'm going to sleep. During Sylphlay next morning, with Pipkin for a respectful chorus. Oh, be quiet, answered Hazel. I'm going to sleep. During Sylphlay next morning, with Pipkin for a respectful chorus, he told the others about his visit to the farm. As he had expected, Bigwig jumped at the idea of a raid to free the hutch rabbits. It can't go wrong, he said. It's a splendid idea, Hazel. I don't know how you open a hutch, but Blackberry will see to that. What annoys me is to think that you ran from that cat. A good rabbit's a match for a cat, any day. My mother went for one once, and she fairly gave it something to remember, I can tell you. Scratched its fur out like willow herb in autumn. Just leave the farm cats to me and 1 or 2 of the others. Blackberry took a little more convincing, but he, like Bigwig and Hazel himself, was secretly disappointed not to have gone on the expedition with Holly, and when the other 2 pointed out that they were relying on him to tell them how to get the hutch open, he agreed to come. Do we need to take everyone? He asked. You say the dog's tied up, and I suppose there can't be more than 3 cats. Too many rabbits will only be a nuisance in the dark. Someone will get lost, and we shall have to spend time looking for him. Well, Dandelion, Speedwell, and Hawkbit, then, said Bigwig, and leave the others behind. Do you mean to go tonight, Hazel? Yes, the sooner the better, said Hazel. Get hold of those 3 and tell them. Pity it's going to be dark. We could have taken Kihar. He'd have enjoyed it. However, their hopes for that night were disappointed, for the rain returned before dusk, settling in on a northwest wind and carrying up the hill the sweet, sour smell of flowering privet from cottage hedges below. Hazel sat on the bank until the light had quite faded. At last, when it was clear that the rain was going to stay for the night, he joined the others in the honeycomb. They had persuaded Kihar to come down out of the wind and wet, and one of Dandelion's tales of Elirira was followed by an extraordinary story that left everyone mystified, but fascinated, about a time when Frith had to go away on a journey, leaving the whole world to be covered with rain. But a man built a great floating hutch that held all of the animals and the birds, until Frith returned and let them out. It won't happen tonight, will it, Hazel? Asked Pipkin, listening to the rain in the beech leaves outside. There's no hutch here. Yehar'll fly you up to the moon, little one, said Bluebell, and you can come down on Bigwig's head like a birch branch in the frost. But there's time to go to sleep first. Before Fiver slept, however, he talked again to Hazel about the raid. I suppose it's no good asking you not to go, he said. Look here, answered Hazel. Have you got one of your bad turns about the farm? If you have, why not say so straight out? Then we'd all know where we were. I've no feelings about the farm one way or the other, said Fiver. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's all right. The feelings come when they will. They don't always come. Not for the Lendry, not for the Crow. If it comes to that, I've no idea what's happening to Holly and the others. It might be good or bad. But there's something that frightens me about you yourself, Hazel. Just you, not any of the others. You're all alone, sharp and clear. like a dead branch against the sky. Well, if you mean you can see trouble for me and not for any of the others, tell them, and I'll leave it to them to decide whether I ought to keep out of it. But that's giving up a lot, Fiver, you know. Even with your word for it, someone's bound to think I'm afraid. Well, I say it's not worth the risk, Hazel. Why not wait for Holly to come back? That's all we have to do. I'll be snared if I wait for Holly. Can't you see the very thing I want is to have these does here when he comes back? But look, Fiver, I'll tell you what. I've come to trust you so much that I'll take the greatest care. In fact, I won't even go into the farmyard myself. I'll stay outside, at the top of the lane. And if that's not meeting your fears halfway, then I don't know what is. Fiver said no more, and Hazel turned his thoughts to the raid, and the difficulty he foresaw of getting the hutch rabbits to go the distance back to the warren. The next day was bright and dry, with a fresh wind that cleared up what remained of the wet. The clouds came racing over the ridge from the south as they had on the May evening when Hazel first climbed the down. But now they were higher and smaller, settling at last into a mackerel sky like a beach at low tide. Hazel took Bigwig and Blackberry to the edge of the escarpment, whence they could look across to Nuthanger on its little hill. He described the approach, and went on to explain how the rabbit hutch was to be found. Bigwig was in high spirits. The wind and the prospect of action excited him, and he spent some time with Dandelion, Hawkbit, and Speedwell, pretending to be a cat and encouraging them to attack him as realistically as they could. Hazel, whose talk with Fiver had somewhat clouded him, recovered as he watched them tussling over the grass, and ended by joining in himself, first as an attacker and then as the cat, staring and quivering for all the world like the Nuthanger tabby. I shall be disappointed if we don't meet a cat after all this, said Dandelion as he waited for his turn to run at a fallen beech branch from one side, claw it twice, and then dash out again. I feel a really dangerous animal. You watch him, Mr. Dando, said Kihar, who was hunting for snails in the grass nearby. Mr. Pigvig, he want you think all one pig yoke, make you brave. Cat, he no yoke. You no see him, you no hear him. Then, yomp, he come. But we're not going there to eat, Kihar, said Bigwig. That's what makes all the difference. We shan't stop watching for cats the whole time. Why not eat the cat? Said Bluebear. Or bring one back here for breeding. That ought to improve the warren stock no end. Hazel and Bigwig had decided that the raid should be carried out as soon after dark as the farm was quiet. This meant that they would cover half the mile to the outlying shreds at sunset. Hazel and Bigwig had decided that the raid should be carried out as soon after dark as the farm was quiet. This meant that they would cover the half mile to the outlying sheds at sunset, instead of risking the confusion of a night journey over ground that only Hazel knew. They could steal a meal among the Swedes, halt till darkness, and cover the short distance to the farm after a good rest. Then, provided they could cope with the cats, there would be plenty of time to tackle the hutch. Whereas, if they were to arrive at dawn, they would be working against time before men came on the scene. Finally, the hutch rabbits would not be missed until the following morning. And remember, said Hazel, it'll probably take these rabbits a long time to get to the down. We shall have to be patient with them. I'd rather do that in darkness, allele or no allele. We don't want to be messing about in broad daylight." "If it comes to the worst," said Bigwig, "we can leave the hutch rabbits and bolt. Alee'll take the hindmost, don't they? I know it's tough, but if there's real trouble, we ought to save our own rabbits first. Let's hope that doesn't happen, though." When they came to set out, Fiver was nowhere to be seen. Hazel felt relieved, for he had been afraid that Fiver might say something that would lower their spirits. But there was nothing worse to contend with than Pipkin's disappointment at being left behind, and this was dispelled when Hazel assured him that the only reason was that he had already done his bit. Bluebell, Acorn, and Pipkin came with them to the foot of the hill and watched them down the hedgerow. They reached the sheds in the twilight after sunset. The summer nightfall was unbroken by owls, and so quiet that they could plainly hear the intermittent, monotonous chug 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 of a nightingale in the distant woods. Two rats among the Swedes showed their teeth, thought better of it, and left them alone. When they had foraged, they rested comfortably in the straw until the western light was quite gone. Rabbits do not name the stars, but nevertheless Hazel was familiar with the sight of Capella rising, and he watched it now until it stood gold and bright in the dark northeastern horizon to the right of the farm. When it reached a certain point which he had fixed, beside a bare branch, he roused the others and led them up the slope toward the elms. Near the top, he slipped through the hedge and brought them down into the lane. Hazel had already told Bigwig of his promise to Fiver to keep out of danger, and Bigwig, who had changed much since the early days, had no fault to find. "If that's what Fiver says, you'd better do it, Hazel," he said. "Anyhow, it'll suit us. You stay outside the farm in a safe place, and we'll bring the rabbits out to you. Then you can take over and get us all away." What Hazel had not said was that the idea that he should remain in the lane was his own suggestion, and that Fiver had acquiesced only because he could not persuade him to give up the idea of the raid altogether. Crouching under a fallen branch on the verge of the lane, Hazel watched the others as they followed Bigwig down toward the farmyard. They went slowly, rabbit fashion, hop, step, and pause. The night was dark, and they were soon out of sight, though he could hear them moving down the side of the long barn. He settled down to wait. Bigwig's hopes of action were fulfilled almost at once. The cat that he met as he reached the far end of the barn was not Hazel's tabby, but another, ginger, black and white, and therefore a female. One of those slim, trotting, quick-moving, tail-twitching cats that sit on farm windowsills in the rain, or keep watch from the tops of sacks on sunny afternoons. It came briskly round the corner of the barn, saw the rabbits, and stopped dead. Without an instant's hesitation, Bigwig went straight for it, as though it had been the beech branch on the down. But quicker even than he, Dandelion ran forward, scratched it, and leaped clear. As it turned, Bigwig threw his full weight upon it from the other side. The cat closed with him, biting and scratching, and Bigwig rolled over on the ground. The others could hear him swearing like a cat himself and struggling for a hold. Then he sank one back leg into the cat's side and kicked backward rapidly, several times. Anyone who is familiar with cats knows that they do not care for a determined assailant. A dog that tries to make itself pleasant to a cat may very well get scratched for its pains, but let that same dog rush into the attack, and many a cat will not wait to meet it. farm cat was bewildered by the speed and fury of Bigwig's charge. It was no weakling and a good ratter, but it had the bad luck to be up against a dedicated fighter who was spoiling for action. As it scrabbled out of Bigwig's reach, Speedwell cuffed it across the face. This was the last blow struck, for the wounded cat made off across the yard and disappeared under the fence of the cow byre. Bigwig was bleeding from 3 deep parallel scratches on the inside of one hind leg. The others gathered round, praising him, but he cut them short, looking round the dark yard as he tried to get his bearings. "Come on," he said. "Quickly, too, while the dog's still quiet. The shed, the hutch. Where do we go?" It was Hawkbit who found the little yard. Hazel had been anxious in case the shed door might be shut, but it stood just ajar, and the 5 of them slipped in one after the other. In the thick gloom they could not make out the hutch, but they could both smell and hear the rabbits. "Blackberry," said Bigwig quickly. "You come with me. Get the hutch open. You other 3, keep watching. If another cat comes, you'll have to take it on yourself." "Fine," said Dandelion. "Just leave it to us." Bigwig and Blackberry found the straw bale and climbed on the plank. As they did so, Foxwood spoke from the hutch. "Hazelraw? Hazelraw, is that you? Have you come back?" "Hazelraw has sent us," answered Blackberry. "We've come to let you out. Will you come with us?" There was a pause and some movement in the hay, and then Clover replied, "Yes, let us out." Blackberry sniffed his way round to the wire door and sat up, nosing over the frame, the hasp, and the staple. It took him some time to realize that the leather hinges were soft enough to bite. Then he found that they lay so smooth and flush with the frame that he could not get his teeth to them. Several times he tried to find a grip, and at last sat back on his haunches, at a loss. "I don't think this door's going to be any good," he said. "I wonder whether there's some other way." At that moment it happened that Boxwood stood on his hind legs and put his front paws high on the wire. Beneath his weight, the top of the door was pressed slightly outward, and the upper of the 2 leather hinges gave slightly where the outer nail held it to the body of the hutch itself. As Boxwood dropped back on all 4s, Blackberry saw that the hinge had buckled and risen just clear of the wood. "Try it now," he said to Bigwig. Bigwig got his teeth to the hinge and pulled. It tore a very little. "By Frith, that'll do," said Blackberry, for all the world like the Duke of Wellington at Salamanca. "We just need time, that's all." The hinge had been well made, and did not give way until they had put to it a great deal more tugging and biting. Dandelion grew nervous. The hinge had been well made, and did not give way until they had put it to a great deal more tugging and biting. Dandelion grew nervous, and twice gave a false alarm. Bigwig, realizing that the sentries were on the jump from watching and waiting with nothing to do, changed places with him, and sent Speedwell up to take over from Blackberry. When at last Dandelion and Speedwell had pulled the leather strip off the nail, Bigwig came back to the hutch himself. But they did not seem much nearer to success. Whenever one of the rabbits inside stood up and rested its forepaws on the upper part of the wire, the door pivoted lightly on the axis of the staple and the lower hinge. but the lower hinge did not tear. Flowing through his whiskers with impatience, Bigwig brought Blackberry back from the threshold. "What's to be done?" he said. "We need some magic, like that jump of wood you shoved into the river." Blackberry looked at the door as Boxwood, inside, pushed it again. The upright of the frame pressed tight against the lower strip of leather, but it held smooth and firm, offering no purchase for teeth. "Push it the other way. Push from this side," he said. "You push, Bigwig. Tell that rabbit inside to go get down." When Bigwig stood up and pushed the top of the door inward, the frame immediately pivoted, much farther than before, because there was no sill along the bottom of the outer side to stop it. The leather hinge twisted, and Bigwig nearly lost his balance. If it had not been for the metal staple arresting the pivoting, he might actually have fallen inside the hutch. Startled, he jumped back, growling. "Well, you said magic, didn't you?" said Blackberry with satisfaction. "Do it again." No strip of leather held by only one broad-headed nail at each end can stand up for long to repeated twisting. Soon one of the nail heads was almost out of sight under the frayed edges. "Careful now," said Blackberry. "If it gives way suddenly, you'll go flying. Just pull it off with your teeth." 2 minutes later, the door hung sagging on the staple alone. Clover pushed the hinge side open and came out, followed by Boxwood. When several creatures, men or animals, have worked together to overcome something offering resistance and have at last succeeded, there follows often a pause, as though they felt the propriety of paying respect to the adversary who has put up so good a fight. The great tree falls, splitting, cracking, rushing down in leaves to the final, shuddering blow along the ground. Then the foresters are silent and do not at once sit down. After hours, the deep snowdrift has been cleared, and the lorry is ready to take the men home out of the cold. But they stand a while, leaning on their spades, and only nodding unsmilingly as the car drivers go through, waving their thanks. The cunning hutch door had become nothing but a piece of wire netting, tacked to a frame made from 4 strips of 1/2 by 1/2, and the rabbit sat on the planks, sniffing and nosing it without talking. After a little while, the other 2 occupants of the hutch, Laurel and Haystack, came hesitantly out and looked about them. "Where is Hazel?" asked Laurel. "Not far away," said Blackberry. "He's waiting in the lane." "What is the lane?" "The lane?" said Blackberry in surprise. "Surely." He stopped as it came over him that these rabbits knew neither lane nor farmyard. They had not the least idea of their most immediate surroundings. He was reflecting on what this meant when Bigwig spoke. "We mustn't wait about now," he said. "Follow me, all of you." "But where?" said Boxwood. "Well, out of here, of course," said Bigwig impatiently. Boxwood looked about him. "I don't know," he began. "Well, I do," said Bigwig. "Just come with us. Never mind anything else." The hutch rabbits looked at each other in bewilderment. It was plain that they were afraid of the great, bristling buck, with his strange shock of fur and his smell of fresh blood. They did not know what to do or understand what was expected of them. They remembered Hazel. They had been excited by the forcing of the door, and curious to come through once it was open. Otherwise they had no purpose whatever, and no means of forming one. They had no more idea of what was involved than a small child who says he will accompany the climbers up the fall. Blackberry's heart sank. What was to be done with them? Left to themselves, they would hop slowly about the shed and the yard until the cats got them. Of their own accord, they could no more run up to the hills than fly to the moon. Was there no simple, plain idea that might get them, or some of them, on the move? He turned to Clover. I don't suppose you've ever eaten grass by night, he said. It tastes much better than by day. Let's all go and have some, shall we? Oh, yes, said Clover. I'd like that. But will it be safe? We're all very much afraid of the cats, you know. They come and stare at us sometimes through the wire, and it makes us shiver. This showed at least the beginnings of sense, thought Blackberry. The big rabbit is a match for any cat, he replied. He nearly killed one on the way here tonight. And he doesn't want to fight another if he can help it, said Bigwig briskly. So if you do want to eat grass by moonlight, let's go to where Hazel Raw's waiting for us. As Bigwig led the way into the yard, he could make out the shape of the cat that he had beaten, watching from the woodpile. Cat-like, it was fascinated by the rabbits, and could not leave them alone, but it evidently had no stomach for another fight, and as they crossed the yard it stayed where it was. The pace was frighteningly slow. Boxwood and Clover seemed to have grasped that there was some sort of urgency, and were clearly doing their best to keep up. But the other two rabbits, once they had hopped into the yard, sat up and looked about them in a foolish manner, completely at a loss. After a good deal of delay, during which the cat left the woodpile and began to move stealthily round toward the side of the shed, Blackberry managed to get them out into the farmyard. But here, finding themselves in an even more open place, they settled into a kind of static panic, like that which sometimes comes upon inexperienced climbers exposed on a sheer face. They could not move, but sat blinking and staring about them in the darkness, taking no notice of Blackberry's coaxing or Bigwig's orders. At this moment, a second cat, Hazel's tabby, came round the further end of the farmhouse and made toward them. As it passed the kennel, the Labrador woke and sat up, thrusting out its head and shoulders and looking first to one side and then the other. It saw the rabbits, ran to the length of its rope, and began to bark. Come on, said Bigwig. We can't stay here. Up the lane, everybody, and quickly too. Blackberry, Speedwell, and Hawkbit ran at once, taking Boxwood and Clover with them into the darkness under the barn. Dandelion remained beside Haystack, begging her to move and expecting every moment to feel the cat's claws in his back. Bigwig leaped across to him. Dandelion, he said in his ear, get out of it, unless you want to be killed. But began Dandelion. Do as I say, said Bigwig. The noise of barking was fearful, and he himself was close to panic. Dandelion hesitated a moment longer. Then he left Haystack and shot up the lane with Bigwig beside him. They found the others gathered round Hazel, under the bank. Boxwood and Clover were trembling and seemed exhausted. Hazel was talking to them reassuringly, but broke off as Bigwig appeared out of the dark. The dog stopped barking, and there was quiet. We're all here, said Bigwig. Shall we go, Hazel? But there were 4 hutch rabbits, said Hazel. Where are the other 2? In the farmyard, said Blackberry. We couldn't do anything with them, and then the dog began to bark. Yes, I heard it. You mean they're loose? They'll be a lot looser soon, said Bigwig angrily. The cats are there. Why did you leave them then? Because they wouldn't move. It was bad enough before the dog started. Is the dog tied? Asked Hazel. Yes, it's tied. But do you expect any rabbit to stand his ground a few feet from an angry dog? No, of course not, replied Hazel. You've done wonders, Bigwig. They were just telling me before you came that you gave one of the cats such a beating that it was afraid to come back for more. Now look, do you think you and Blackberry, with Speedwell here and Hawkbit, can get these two rabbits back to the warren? I'm afraid you may need most of the night. They can't go very fast, and you'll have to be patient with them. Dandelion, you come with me, will you? Where, Hazelraw? To fetch the other two. You're the fastest, so it won't be so dangerous for you, will it? Now, don't hang about, Bigwig. There's a good fellow. I'll see you tomorrow. Before Bigwig could reply, he had disappeared under the elms. Dandelion remained where he was, looking at Bigwig uncertainly. Are you going to do what he says? Asked Bigwig. Well, are you? Said Dandelion. It took Bigwig no more than a moment to realize that if he said he was not, complete disorganization would follow. He could not take all the others back into the farm, and he could not leave them alone. He muttered something about Hazel being too clever by half, puffed Hawkbit off a sow thistle he was nibbling, and led his 5 rabbits over the bank into the field. Dandelion, left alone, set off after Hazel into the farmyard. As he went down the side of the barn, he could hear Hazel out in the open, near the doe haystack. Neither of the hutch rabbits had moved from where he and Bigwig had left them. The dog had returned to its kennel, but although it was not to be seen, he felt that it was awake and watchful. He came cautiously out of the shadow and approached Hazel. I'm just having a chat with Haystack here, said Hazel. I've been explaining that we've got a little way to go. Do you think you could hop across to Laurel and get him to join us? He spoke almost gaily, but Dandelion could see his dilated eyes and the slight trembling of his front paws. He himself was now sensing something peculiar, a kind of luminosity in the air. There seemed to be a curious vibration somewhere in the distance. He looked round for the cats and saw that, as he feared, both were crouching in front of the farmhouse a little way off. Their reluctance to come closer could be attributed to Bigwig, but they would not go away. Looking across the yard at them, Dandelion felt a sudden clutch of horror. Hazel, he whispered, the cats. Dear Frith, why are their eyes glittering green like that? Look. Hazel sat up quickly, and as he did so, Dandelion leaped back in real terror, for Hazel's eyes were shining a deep, glowing red in the dark. At that moment, the humming vibration grew louder, quenching the rushing of the night breeze in the elms. Then all 4 rabbits sat as though transfixed by the sudden, blinding light that poured over them like a cloudburst. Their very instinct was numbed in this terrible glare. The dog barked, and then became silent once more. Dandelion tried to move, but could not. The awful brightness seemed to cut into his brain. The car, which had driven up the lane and over the brow under the elms, came on a few more yards and stopped. Lucy's rabbits is out. Look. Ah, Best get in 'em quick. Leave the lights on." The sound of men's voices from somewhere beyond the fierce light brought Hazel to his senses. He could not see, but nothing, he realized, had happened to his hearing or his nose. He shut his eyes and at once knew where he was. "Dandelion, haystack, shut your eyes and run." A moment later he smelled the lichen and cool moisture of one of the saddle stones. He was under the barn. Dandelion was near him, and a little further away was Haystack. Outside, the men's boots scraped and grated over the stones. "That's it. Get around behind him. He won't go far. Pick him up, then." Hazel moved across to Haystack. "I'm afraid we'll have to leave Laurel," he said. "Just follow me." Keeping under the raised floor of the barn, they all three scuttled back toward the elm trees. The men's voices were left behind. Coming out into the grass near the lane, they found the darkness behind the headlights full of the fumes of exhaust. A hostile, choking smell that added to their confusion. Haystack sat down once more and could not be persuaded to move. "Shouldn't we leave her, Hazel Raw?" asked Dandelion. "After all, the men won't hurt her. They've caught Laurel and taken him back to the hutch." "If it was a buck, I'd say yes," said Hazel. "But we need this dough. That's what we came for." At this moment they caught the smell of burning white sticks and heard the men returning up the farmyard. There was a metallic bumping as they rummaged in the car. The sound seemed to rouse Haystack. She looked round at Dandelion. "I don't want to go back to the hutch," she said. "You're sure?" asked Dandelion. "Yes, I'll go with you." Dandelion immediately turned for the hedgerow. It was only when he had crossed it and reached the ditch beyond that he had realized that he was on the opposite side of the lane from that on which they had first approached. He was in a strange ditch. However, there seemed to be nothing to worry about. The ditch led down the slope, and that was the way home. He moved slowly along it, waiting for Hazel to join them. Hazel had crossed the lane a few moments after Dandelion and Haystack. Behind him, he heard the men moving away from the Hurdidu. As he topped the bank, the beam of a torch shone up the lane and picked out its red eyes and white tail, disappearing into the hedge. "There's a wild rabbit. Look. Ah, reckon the rest of ours ain't far off. Got up there with 'em, see? Best to go and have a look." In the ditch, Hazel overtook Haystack and Dandelion under a clump of brambles. "Get on quickly if you can," he said to Haystack. "The men are just behind." "We can't get on, Hazel," said Dandelion, "without leaving the ditch. It's blocked." Hazel sniffed ahead. Immediately beyond the brambles, the ditch was closed by a pile of earth, weeds, and rubbish. They would have to come into the open. Already, the men were over the bank, and the torchlight was flickering up and down the hedgerow, and through the brambles above their very heads. Then, only a few yards away, footfalls vibrated along the edge of the ditch. Hazel turned to Dandelion. "Listen," he said. "I'm going to run across the corner of the field, from this ditch to the other one, so that they see me. They'll try to shine that light on me for sure. While they're doing that, you and Haystack climb the bank, get into the lane, and run down to the suite ahead. You can hide there, and I'll join you. Ready?" There was no time to argue. A moment later, Hazel broke almost under the men's feet and ran all the way across the field. There he goes. Keep the torch on him. Nice and steady. Dandelion and Haystack scrambled over the bank and dropped into the lane. Hazel, with the torch beam behind him, had almost reached the other ditch when he felt a sharp blow on one of his hind legs and a hot, stinging pain along his side. The report of the cartridge sounded an instant later. As he somersaulted into a clump of nettles in the ditch bottom, he remembered vividly the scent of bean flowers at sunset. He had not known that the men had a gun. Hazel crawled through the nettles, dragging his injured leg. In a few moments, the men would shine their torch on him and pick him up. He stumbled along the inner wall of the ditch, feeling the blood flowing over his foot. Suddenly, he was aware of a draft against one side of his nose. Suddenly, he was aware of a draft against one side of his nose, the smell of damp, rotten matter, and a hollow, echoing sound at his very ear. He was beside the mouth of a land drain, which emptied into the ditch. A smooth, cold tunnel, narrower than a rabbit hole, but wide enough. With flattened ears and belly pressed to the wet floor, he crawled up it, pushing a little pile of thin mud in front of him, and lay still as he felt the thud of boots coming nearer. I don't rightly know, John, whether you hit it or not. Ah, I hit it all right. That's blood down there, see? Ah, well. But that don't signify. He might be a long ways off by now. I reckon you've lost it. I reckon he's in them nettles. Have a look then. Nah, he ain't. Well, we can't go beggaring up and down here half the bloody night. We gotta catch them as got out the hutch. Didn't ought to have fired by rights, John. Frightened them off, see? You can have a look for him tomorrow, if he's here. The silence returned, but still Hazel lay motionless in the whispering chill of the tunnel. A cold lassitude came over him, and he passed into a dreaming, inert stupor, full of cramp and pain. After a time, a thread of blood began to trickle over the lip of the drain into the trampled, deserted ditch. Bigwig crouched close to Blackberry in the straw of the cattle shed, leaped to flight at the sound of the shot 200 yards up the lane. He checked himself and turned to the others. Don't run, he said quickly. Where do you want to run to, anyway? No holes here. Further away from the gun, replied Blackberry, wide-eyed. Wait, said Bigwig, listening. They're running down the lane. Can't you hear them? I can hear only 2 rabbits, answered Blackberry after a pause, and one of them sounds exhausted. They looked at each other and waited. Then Bigwig got up again. Stay here, all of you, he said. I'll go and bring them in. Out on the verge, he found Dandelion urging Haystack, who was lamed and spent. Come in here quickly, said Bigwig. For Frith's sake. Where's Hazel? The men have shot him, replied Dandelion. They reached the other 5 rabbits in the straw. Dandelion did not wait for their questions. They've shot Hazel. They'd caught that laurel and put him back in the hutch. Then they came after us. The 3 of us were at the end of a blocked ditch. Hazel went out of his own accord to distract their attention while we got away. But we didn't know they had a gun. Are you sure they killed him? Said Speedwell. I didn't actually see him hit, but they were very close to him. We'd better wait, said Bigwig. They waited a long time. At last, Dandelion and Bigwig went cautiously back up the lane. They found the bottom of the ditch trampled by boots and streaked with blood, and returned to tell the others. The journey back, with the 3 limping hutch rabbits, lasted more than 2 weary hours. All were dejected and wretched. When at last they reached the foot of the down, Bigwig told Blackberry, Speedwell, and Hawkbit to leave them and go on to the warren. They approached the wood just at first light, and a rabbit ran to meet them through the wet grass. It was Fiver. Blackberry stopped and waited beside him while the other 2 went on in silence. Fiver, he said, there's bad news. Hazel. I know, replied Fiver. I know now. How do you know? Asked Blackberry, startled. As you came through the grass just now, said Fiver, very low. There was a 4th rabbit behind you, limping and covered with blood. I ran to see who it was, and then there were only 3 of you, side by side. He paused and looked across the down, as though still seeking the bleeding rabbit who had vanished in the half-light. Then, as Blackberry said nothing more, he asked, Do you know what happened? When Blackberry had told his news, Fiver returned to the warren and went underground to his empty burrow. A little later, Bigwig brought the hutch rabbits up the hill and at once called everyone to meet in the honeycomb. Fiver did not appear. It was a dismal welcome for the strangers. Not even Bluebell could find a cheerful word. Dandelion was inconsolable to think that he might have stopped Hazel breaking from the ditch. The meeting came to an end in a dreary silence and a half-hearted sylphlay. Later that morning, Holly came limping into the warren. Of his 3 companions, only Silver was alert and unharmed. Buckthorn was wounded in the face, and Strawberry was shivering and evidently ill from exhaustion. There were no other rabbits with them. Chapter 26. Fiver Beyond. On his dreadful journey, after the shaman has wandered through dark forests and over great ranges of mountains, he reaches an opening in the ground. The most difficult stage of the adventure now begins. The depths of the underworld open before him. Uno Harva, quoted by Joseph Campbell in The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Fiver lay on the earth floor of the burrow. Outside, the downs were still in the intense bright heat of noon. The dew and gossamer had dried early from the grass, and by mid-morning the finches had fallen silent. Now, along the lonely expanses of wiry turf, the air wavered. On the footpath that led past the warren, bright threads of light, watery, a mirage, trickled and glittered across the shortest, smoothest grass. From a distance, the trees along the edge of the beech hanger appeared full of great, dense shadows, impenetrable to the dazzled eye. The only sound was the zip-zip of the grasshoppers, the only scent that of the warm thyme. In the burrow, Fiver slept and woke uneasily through the heat of the day, fidgeting and scratching as the last traces of moisture dried out of the earth above him. Once, when a trickle of powdery soil fell from the roof, he leaped out of sleep and was in the mouth of the run before he came to himself. and returned to where he had been lying. Each time he woke, he remembered the loss of Hazel, and suffered once more the knowledge that had pierced him as the shadowy, limping rabbit disappeared in the first light of morning on the down. Where was that rabbit now? Where had it gone? He began to follow it among the tangled paths of his own thoughts, over the cold, dew-wet ridge, and down into the dawn mist of the fields below. The mist swirled round Fiver as he crept through thistles and nettles. Now he could no longer see the limping rabbit ahead. He was alone and afraid, yet perceiving old, familiar sounds and smells, those of the field where he was born. The thick weeds of summer were gone. He was under the bare ash boughs and the flowering blackthorn of March. He was crossing the brook, going up the slope toward the lane, toward the place where Hazel and he had come upon the notice board. Would the board still be there? He looked timidly up the slope. View was blotted with mist, but as he neared the top, he saw a man busy over a pile of tools, a spade, a rope, and other smaller implements, the use of which he did not know. The notice board lay flat on the ground. It was smaller than he remembered, and fixed to a single long, square post, sharpened at the further end to put into the earth. The surface of the board was white, just as he had seen it before, and covered with the sharp black lines like sticks. Fiver came hesitantly up the slope and stopped close to the man, who stood looking down into a deep, narrow hole sunk in the ground at his feet. The man turned to Fiver with the kind of amiability that an ogre might show to a victim whom they both know that he will kill and eat as soon as it suits him to do so. "Ah, and what am I doing, eh?" asked the man. "What are you doing?" answered Fiver, staring and twitching with fear. "I'm just putting up this here old board," said the man. "And I suppose you wants to know what for, eh?" "Yes," whispered Fiver. "It's for that old Hazel," said the man. "Only where 'tis, see, we got to put up a bit of a notice, like on his account. And what do you reckon it says, huh?" "I don't know," said Fiver. "How how can a board say anything?" "Ah, but it do, see?" replied the man. "That's where we knows what you don't. That's why we kills you when we has a mind to. Now, you wants take a good look at that there board, and then very likely you'll know more'n what you knows now." In the livid, foggy twilight, Fiver stared at the board. As he stared, the black sticks flickered on the white surface. They raised their sharp, wedge-shaped little heads and chattered together, like a nest full of young weasels. The sound, mocking and cruel, came faintly to his ears, as though muffled by sand or sacking. "In memory of Hazel Ra, in memory of Hazel Ra, in memory of Hazel Ra. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha." "Well, that's where it is, you see," said the man. "And I've got the thing up on this here board. That's to say, soon as I get it stood up proper. Same as you'd hang up Jay, like, or old Stoke. Ah, I'm going to hang him up." "No," cried Fiver. "No, you shan't. Only, I ain't got him, see?" went on the man. "That's why I can't get done. I can't hang him up, 'cause he've gone down the bloody hole. That's where he've gone. He've gone down the bloody hole, just when I'd gotten lined up, and I can't get him out. Fiver crept up to the man's boots and peered into the hole. It was circular, a cylinder of baked earthenware that disappeared vertically into the ground. He called, "Hazel, Hazel." Far down in the hole, something moved, and he was about to call again. Then the man bent down and hit him between the ears. Fiver was struggling in a thick cloud of earth, soft and powdery. Someone was saying, "Steady, Fiver, steady." He sat up. There was soil in his eyes, his ears, and his nostrils. He could not smell. He shook himself and said, "Who is it?" "It's Blackberry. I came to see how you were." "It's all right. A bit of the roof's fallen, that's all. There have been falls all over the Warren today. It's the heat. Anyway, it woke you from a nightmare if I know anything. You were thrashing about and calling out for Hazel. You poor old chap. What a miserable thing it is to have happened. We must try to bear it as best we can. We've all got to stop running one day, you know. They say Frith knows all the rabbits. Every one." "Is it evening?" asked Fiver. "Not yet, no. But it's a fair time after Nifrith. Holly and the others have come back, you know. The Strawberry's very ill, and they haven't any does with them. Not one. Everything's as bad as it could be. Holly's still asleep. He was completely exhausted. He said he'd tell us what happened this evening. When we told him about poor Hazel, he said, 'Fiver, you're not listening. I expect you'd rather I kept quiet.'" "Blackberry," said Fiver, "do you know the place where Hazel was shot?" "Yes, Bigwig and I went and looked at the ditch before we came away. But you mustn't. Could you go there with me now?" "Go back there? Oh, no, it's a long way, Fiver. And what would be the good? The risk, and this fearful heat. And you'd only make yourself wretched." "Hazel isn't dead," said Fiver. "Yes, the men took him away. Fiver, I saw the blood." "Yes, but you didn't see Hazel, because he isn't dead. Blackberry, you must do what I ask." "You're asking too much." "Then I shall have to go alone. But what I'm asking you is to come and save Hazel's life." When at last Blackberry had reluctantly given in, and they had set out down the hill, Fiver went almost as fast as though he were running for cover. Again and again he urged Blackberry to make haste. The fields were empty in the glare. Every creature bigger than a bluebottle was sheltering from the heat. When they reached the outlying sheds beside the lane, Blackberry began to explain how he and Bigwig had gone back to search, but Fiver cut him short. "We have to go up the slope. I know that. But you must show me the ditch." The elms were still. There was not the least sound in the leaves. The ditch was thick with cow parsley, hemlock, and long trails of green flowering bryony. Blackberry led the way to the trampled patch of nettles, and Fiver sat still among them, sniffing and looking about him in the silence. Blackberry watched him disconsolately. A faint breath of wind stole across the fields, and a blackbird began to sing from somewhere beyond the elms. At last Fiver began to move along the bottom of the ditch. The insects buzzed round his ears, and suddenly a little cloud of flies flew up, disturbed from a projecting stone. No, not a stone. It was smooth and regular, a circular lip of earthenware, the brown mouth of a drain, stained black at the lower edge by a thin, dried thread of blood, of rabbit's blood. "The bloody hole," whispered Fiver. "The bloody hole." He peered into the dark opening. It was blocked by a rabbit. That was plain to be smelled. A rabbit whose faint pulse could just be heard, magnified in the confined tunnel. "Hazel," said Fiver. Blackberry was beside him at once. "What is it, Fiver?" "Hazel's in that hole," said Fiver, "and he's alive." Chapter 27. You can't imagine it unless you've been there. "My God bless, never I see such a people." Signor Piazzi, quoted by Cecilia Thrale. In the honeycomb, Bigwig and Holly were waiting to begin the second meeting since the loss of Hazel. As the air began to cool, the rabbits woke, and first one and then another came down the runs that led from the smaller burrows. All were subdued and doubtful at heart. Like the pain of a bad wound, the effect of a deep shock takes some while to be felt. When a child is told, for the first time in his life, that a person he has known is dead, although he does not disbelieve it, he may well fail to comprehend it and later ask, perhaps more than once, where the dead person is and when he is coming back. When Pipkin had planted in himself, like some sombre tree, the knowledge that Hazel would never return, his bewilderment exceeded his grief, and this bewilderment he saw on every side among his companions. Faced with no crisis of action, and with nothing to prevent them from continuing their life in the warren as before, the rabbits were nevertheless overcome by the conviction that their luck was gone. Hazel was dead, and Holly's expedition had totally failed. What would follow? Holly, gaunt, his staring pelt full of goosegrass and fragments of burdock, was talking with the three hutch rabbits, and reassuring them as best as he could. No one could say now that Hazel had thrown away his life in a foolhardy prank. The 2 does were the only gain that anyone had made, the Warrens' only asset. But they were plainly so ill at ease in their new surroundings that Holly was already contending against his own belief that there was little to be hoped for from them. Those who are upset and on edge tend to be infertile. And how were these does to make themselves at home in strange conditions, and a place where everyone was lost so poorly in his own thoughts? They would die, perhaps, or wander away. He buckled once more to the task of explaining that he was sure better times lay ahead, and as he did so, felt himself the least convinced of any. Bigwig had sent Acorn to see whether there was anyone still to come. Acorn returned to say that Strawberry felt too ill, and that he could find neither Blackberry nor Fiver. "Well, leave Fiver," said Bigwig. "Poor fellow. He'll feel better by himself for a time, I dare say." "He's not in his burrow, though," said Acorn. "Never mind," said Bigwig. But the thought came to him. Fiver and Blackberry? Could they have left the warren without telling anyone? If they have, what will happen when the others get to know? Should he ask Keyhar to go and look for them while there was still some light? But if Keyhar found them, what then? They could not be compelled to return. Or if they were, what good would that do, if they wanted to be gone? At that moment, Holly began to speak, and everyone became quiet. "We all know we're in a mess," said Holly, "and I suppose before long we shall have to talk about what's best to be done. But I thought that first of all, I ought to tell you how it is that we four, Silver, Buckthorn, Strawberry, and I, have come back without any doughs. You don't have to remind me that when we set out, everyone thought it was going to be straightforward. And here we are, one rabbit sick, one wounded, and nothing to show for it. You're all wondering why. No one's blaming you, Holly, said Bigwig. I don't know whether I'm to blame or not, replied Holly, but you'll tell me that when you've heard the story. That morning, when we left, it was good weather for Celestial on the move, and we all felt there was no hurry. It was cool, I remember, and looked as if it would be some time before the day got really bright and cloudless. There's a farm not far away from the other end of this wood, and although there were no men about so early, I didn't fancy going that way, so we kept up on high ground on the evening side. We were all expecting to come to the edge of the down, but there isn't any steep edge as there is on the north. The upland just goes on, open, dry, and lonely. There's plenty of cover for rabbits, standing corn, hedges, and banks, but no real woodland, just great open fields of light soil with big white flintstones. I was hoping that we might find ourselves in the sort of country we used to know, meadows and woods, but we didn't. Anyhow, we found a track with a good, thick hedge along one side, and we decided to follow that. We took it easy and stopped a good deal, because I was taking care to avoid running into a leal. I'm sure it's bad country for stoats as well as foxes, and I hadn't much idea what we were going to do if we met one. I'm pretty certain we did pass close to a weasel, said Silver. I could smell it. But you know how it is with the leal. If they're not actually hunting, they often take no notice of you. We left very little scent, and buried our haraka as though we were cats. Well, before Nifrith, went on Holly, the track brought us to a long, thin wood running right across the way we were going. These downland woods are queer, aren't they? This was no thicker than the one above us now, but it stretched as far as we could see either way, in a dead straight line. I don't like straight lines. Men make them. And sure enough, we found a road beside this wood. It was a very lonely, empty road, but all the same I didn't want to hang about there. So we went straight through the wood and out the other side. Kihar spotted us in the fields beyond and told us to alter our direction. I asked him how we were getting on, and he said we were about halfway. So I thought we might as well start looking for somewhere to lie up for the night. I didn't fancy the open, and in the end we made scrapes in the bottom of a kind of little pit we found. Then we had a good feed and passed the night very well. I don't think we need tell you everything about the journey. It came on to rain just after the morning feed, and there was a nasty cold wind with it, so we stayed where we were until after Nifrith. It brightened up then, and we went on. The going wasn't very nice because of the wet, but by early evening I reckoned we ought to be near the place. I was looking round when a hare came through the grass, and I asked him whether he knew of a big warren close by. Ifrafra? He asked. Are you going to Ifrafra? If that's what it's called, I answered. Do you know it? No, I said, we don't. We want to know where it is. Well, he said, my advice to you is to run, and quickly. I was just wondering what to make of that, when suddenly 3 big rabbits came over the bank, just the way I did that night when I came to arrest you, Bigwig, and one of them said, Can I see your marks? Marks, I said. What marks? I don't understand. You're not from Ifrafra? He said. No, I said. We're going there. We're strangers. Will you come with me? No. Have you come far? Or are you wet through? Or anything like that? So then these three rabbits took us off down the bank, and that was how we came to Ifrafra, as they call it. And I'd better try and tell you something about it, so that you'll know what a dirty little bunch of sniveling head scrapers we are here. Ifrafra is a big warren, a good deal bigger than the one we came from. The Threeras, I mean. And the one fear of every rabbit in it is that men are going to find them and infect them with the white blindness. The whole warren is organized to conceal its existence. The holes are all hidden, and the Owsla have every rabbit in the place under orders. You can't call your life your own, and in return you have safety, if it's worth having at the price you pay. As well as the Owsla, they have what they call a council, and each of the council rabbits has some special thing he looks after. One looks after feeding, another's responsible for the ways in which they keep hidden, another looks after breeding, and so on. As far as the ordinary rabbits are concerned, only a certain number can be above ground at one time. Every rabbit is marked when he's a kitten. They bite them, deep, and under the chin, or in a haunch or forepaw. Then they can be told by the scar for the rest of their lives. You mustn't be found above ground, unless it's the right time of day for your mark. Who's to stop you? Growled Bigwig. That's the really frightening part. The Owsla. Well, you can't imagine it unless you've been there. The chief is a rabbit named Woundwort. General Woundwort, they call him. I'll tell you more about him in a minute. Then under him there are captains, each one in charge of a mark, and each captain has his own officers and sentries. There's a marked captain with his band on duty at every time of the day and night. If a man happens to come anywhere near, which isn't often, the sentries give warning long before he comes close enough to see anything. They give warning of Allele, too. They prevent anyone dropping hraka, except in special places in the ditches where it's buried. And if they see any rabbit above ground, whom they don't recognize as having the right to be there, they ask to see his mark. Frith knows what happens if he can't explain himself, but I can guess pretty well. Rabbits in Ifrafra quite often go days at a time without the sight of Frith. If their mark's on night silflay, then they feed by night, wet or fine, warm or cold. They're all used to talking, playing, and mating in the burrows underground. If a mark can't silflay at their appointed time for some reason or other, say there was a man working somewhere near, that's just too bad. They miss their turn till the next day. But surely it alters them very much, living like that? Asked Dandelion. Very much indeed, replied Holly. Most of them can't do anything but what they're told. They've never been out of Ifrafra, and never smelled an enemy. The one aim of every rabbit in Ifrafra is to get into the Owsla because of the privileges, and the one aim of everyone in the Owsla is to get into the council. The council have the best of everything, but the Owsla have to be keeping very strong and tough. They take it in turn to do what they call wide patrol. They go out over the country, all around the place, living in the open for days at a time. It's partly to find out anything they can, and partly to train them and make them tough and cunning. Any Halessial they find, they pick up and bring back to Ifrafra. If they won't come, they kill them. They reckon Halessial is a danger, because they may attract the attention of men. The wide patrols report back to General Woundwort, and the council decide what to do about anything new that they think may be dangerous. They missed you on the way in, then, said Bluebell. Oh no, they didn't. We learned later that some time after we'd been brought in by this rabbit, Captain Campion, a runner arrived from a wide patrol to say that they'd picked up the track of 3 or 4 rabbits coming toward Ifrafra from the north, and were there any orders. He was sent back to say that we were safely under control. Anyway, this Captain Campion took us down to a hole in the ditch. The mouth of the hole was a bit of old earthenware pipe, and if a man had pulled it out, the opening would have fallen in and showed no trace of the run inside. And there he handed us over to another captain, because he had to go back above ground for the rest of his spell of duty, you see. We were taken to a big burrow and told to make ourselves at home. There were other rabbits in the burrow, and it was by listening to them and asking questions that I learned most of what I've been telling you. We got talking to some of the does, and I made friends with one called Hyzenthale. I told her about our problem here and why we'd come, and then she told us about Ifrafra. When she'd finished, I said, "It sounds terrible. Has it always been like this?" She said no. Her mother had told her that in years gone by the warren had been elsewhere, and much smaller. But when General Woundwort came, he had made them move to Ifrafra, and then he'd worked out this whole system of concealment and perfected it until rabbits in Ifrafra were as safe as stars in the sky. Most rabbits here die of old age unless the owls kill them off, she said. But the trouble is, there are more rabbits now than the warren can hold. Any fresh digging that's allowed has to be done under Owsla supervision, and they do it terribly slowly and carefully. It all has to be hidden, you see. We're overcrowded, and a lot of rabbits don't get above ground as much as they need to. And for some reason, there are not enough bucks and too many does. A lot of us have found we can't produce litters because of the overcrowding, but no one is ever allowed to leave. Only a few days ago, several of us does went to the council and asked whether we could form an expedition to start a new warren somewhere else. We said we'd go far, far away as they liked, but they wouldn't hear of it, not on any account. Things can't go on like this. The system's breaking down, but it doesn't do to be heard talking about it. Well, I thought, this sounds hopeful. Surely they won't object to our proposals. We only want to take a few does and no bucks. They've got more does than there's room for, and we want to take them further away than anyone here can ever have been. A little later, another captain came and said we were to come with him to the council meeting. The council meet in a kind of big burrow. It's long and rather narrow. Not as good as this honeycomb of ours, because they've got no tree roots to make a wide roof. We had to wait outside where they were talking about all sorts of things. We were just one piece of daily council business. Strangers apprehended. There was another rabbit waiting, and he was under special guard. Auslafa, they call them, the council police. I've never been near anyone so frightened in my life. I thought he'd go mad with fear. I asked one of these Auslafa what was the matter, and he said that this rabbit, Blackavar, had been caught trying to run away from the warren. Well, they took him inside, and first of all we heard the poor fellow trying to explain himself, and then he was crying and begging for mercy. And when he came out, they'd ripped both his ears to shreds, worse than this one of mine. We were all sniffing at him, absolutely horror-stricken. But one of the Auslafa said, "You needn't make a fuss. He's lucky to be alive." So while we were chewing on that, someone came out and said the council were ready for us. As soon as we got in, we were put up in front of this General Woundwort, and he really is a grim customer. I don't think even you'd match up to him, Bigwig. He's almost as big as a hare, and there's something about his mere presence that frightens you, as if blood and fighting and killing were all just part of the day's work to him. I thought he'd begin by asking us some questions about who we were and what we wanted, but he didn't do anything like that. He said, "I'm going to explain the rules of the warren and the conditions on which you'll live here. You must listen carefully, because the rules are to be kept, and any breaking of them will be punished." So then I spoke up at once and said that there was a misunderstanding. We were an embassy, I said, come from another warren to ask for Ifrafra's goodwill and help. And I went on to explain that all we wanted was their agreement to our persuading a few does to come back with us. When I'd finished, General Woundwort said that it was out of the question. There was nothing to discuss. I replied that we'd like to stay with them for a day or two and try to persuade them to change their mind. "Oh, yes," he said, "you'll stay, but there'll be no further occasion for you to take up the council's time, for the next few days, at any rate." I said that seemed hard. Our request was surely a reasonable one, and I was just going to ask them to consider one or two things from our point of view, when another of the counselors, a very old rabbit, said, "You seem to think you're here to argue with us and drive a bargain, but we're the ones to say what you're going to do." I said they should remember that we were representing another warren, even if it was smaller than theirs. We thought of ourselves as their guests, and it was only what I'd said that I realized with a horrible shock that they thought of us as their prisoners, or as good as prisoners, whatever they might call it. Well, I'd rather say no more about the end of that meeting. Strawberry tried all he could to help me. He spoke very well about the decency and comradeship natural to animals. Animals don't behave like men, he said. If they have to fight, they fight, and if they have to kill, they kill. But they don't sit down and set their wits to work to devise ways of spoiling other creatures' lives and hurting them. They have dignity and animality. But it was all no use. At last we fell silent, and General Woundwort said, "The council can't spare any more time for you now, and I shall have to leave it to your mark captain to tell you the rules. You'll join the right flank mark under Captain Bugloss. Later, we shall see you again, and you'll find us perfectly friendly and helpful to rabbits who understand what's expected of them." So then the Owsla took us out to join the right flank mark. Apparently Captain Bugloss was too busy to see us, and I took care to keep out of his way, because I thought he might want to start marking us then and there. But soon I began to understand what Hyzenthalay had meant when she said the system wasn't working properly anymore. The burrows were overcrowded, at least by our standards. It was easy to escape attention. Even in one mark, the rabbits don't all know each other. We found places in a burrow and tried to get some sleep. But early in the night we were woken and told to silflay. I thought there might be a chance to run for it in the moonlight, but there seemed to be sentries everywhere. And besides the sentries, the captain kept two runners with him, whose job was to rush off at once in any direction from which an alarm might be given. When we'd fed, we went underground again. Nearly all the rabbits were very subdued and docile. We avoided them, because we meant to escape if we could, and we didn't want to get known. but try as I would, I couldn't think of a plan. We fed again some time before Nifrith the next day, and then it was back underground. The time dragged terribly. At last, it must have been as evening was coming on, I joined a little group of rabbits listening to a story. And do you know, it was the king's lettuce. The rabbit who was telling it was nowhere near as good as Dandelion, but I listened all the same, just for something to do. And it was when he got to the bit where Elorira dresses up and pretends to be the doctor at King Darzan's palace that I suddenly had an idea. It was a very risky one, but I thought there was a chance that it might work simply because every rabbit in Ifrafra usually does what he's told without question. I'd been watching Captain Bugloss, and he struck me as a nice enough fellow, conscientious and a bit weak and rather harassed by having more to do than he could really cope with. That night, when we were called to Silflay, it was pitch dark and raining, but you don't bother about a little thing like that in Ifrafra. You're only too glad to get out and get some food. All the rabbits trooped up, and we waited until the very last. Captain Bugloss was out on the bank with two of his sentries. Silver and the others went out in front of me, and then I came up to him panting as if I'd been running. "Captain Bugloss?" "Yes," he said. "What is it?" "You're wanted by the council at once." "Why, what do you mean?" he asked. "What for?" "No doubt they'll tell you that when they see you," I answered. "I shouldn't keep them waiting if I were you." "Who are you?" he said. "You're not one of the council runners. I know them all. What mark are you?" "I'm not here to answer your questions," I said. "Shall I go back and tell them that you won't come?" He looked doubtful at that, and I made as if I were going. But then all of a sudden he said, "Very well." He looked awfully frightened, poor fellow. "But who's to take over here while I'm gone?" "I am," I said. "General Woundwort's orders. But come back quickly. I don't want to hang about half the night doing your job." He scuttled off, and I turned to the other two and said, "Stay here and look alive, too. I'm going round the sentries." Well, then the four of us ran off into the dark, and sure enough, after we'd gone a little way, two sentries popped up and tried to stop us. We all piled straight into them. I thought they'd run, but they didn't. They fought like mad, and one of them tore Buckthorn all down the nose. But of course there were four of us, and in the end we broke past them and simply tore across the field. We had no idea which way we were going, what with the rain and the night. We just ran. I think the reason why the pursuit was a bit slow off the mark was because poor old Bugloss wasn't there to give the orders. Anyway, we had a fair start, but presently we could hear that we were being followed, and what was worse, we were being overtaken. The Ifrafranausla are no joke, believe me. They're all picked for size and strength, and there's nothing they don't know about moving in wet and darkness. They're all so much afraid of the council that they're not afraid of anything else. It wasn't long before I knew we were in trouble. The patrol that was after us could actually follow us in the dark and rain faster than we could run away, and before long they were close behind. I was just going to tell the others that there was nothing for it but to turn and fight, when we came to a great steep bank that seemed to slope almost straight up into the air. It was steeper than this hillside below us here, and the slope seemed to be regular, as if men had made it. Well, there was no time to think about it, so up we went. It was covered with rough grass and bushes. I don't know how far it was to the top exactly, but I should guess it was as high as a well-grown rowan tree, perhaps a bit higher. When we got to the top, we found ourselves on small, light stones that shifted as we ran on them. That gave us away completely. Then we came upon broad, flat pieces of wood and two great, fixed bars of metal that made a noise, a kind of low, humming noise in the dark. I was just saying to myself, This is men's work, all right. When I fell over the other side, I hadn't realized that the whole top of the bank was only a very short distance across, and the other side was just as steep. I went head over heels down the bank in the dark and fetched up against an elder bush, and there I lay. Ollie stopped and fell silent, as though pondering on what he remembered. At last he said, "It's going to be very hard to describe to you what happened next. Although all four of us were there, we don't understand it ourselves. But what I'm going to say now is the cold truth. Lord Frith sent one of his great messengers to save us from the Ifrafranausla. Each one of us had fallen over the edge of the bank in one place or another. Buckthorn, who was half blinded with his own blood, went down almost to the bottom. I'd picked myself up and was looking back at the top. There was just enough light in the sky to see the Ifrafrans if they came over. And then, an enormous thing. I can't give you any idea of it. As big as 1,000 Hrudadil, bigger, came rushing out of the night. It was full of fire and smoke and light, and it roared and beat on the metal lines until the ground shook beneath it. It drove in between us and the Ifrafrans like 1,000 thunderstorms with lightning. I tell you, I was beyond being afraid. I couldn't move. The flashing and the noise, they split the whole night apart. I don't know what happened to the Ifrafrans. Either they ran away, or it cut them down. And then suddenly it was gone, and we heard it disappearing. Rattle and bang, far away in the distance. We were completely alone. For a long time I couldn't move. At last I got up and found the others, one by one, in the dark. None of us said a word. At the bottom of the slope we discovered a kind of tunnel that went right through the bank from one side to the other. We crept into it and came out on the side where we'd gone up. Then we went a long way through the fields, until I reckoned we must be well clear of Afrafra. We crawled into a ditch and slept there, all four of us, until morning. There was no reason why anything shouldn't have come and killed us, and yet we knew we were safe. You may think it's a wonderful thing to be saved by Lord Frith in his power. How many rabbits has that happened to, I wonder? But I would tell you, it was far more frightening than being chased by the Ifrafran. Not one of us will forget lying on that bank in the rain while that fire creature went by above our heads. Why did it come on our account? That's more than we shall ever know. The next morning, I cast around a bit, and soon I knew which was the right direction. You know how you always do. The rain had stopped, and we set out. But it was a very hard journey back. We were exhausted long before the end, all except Silver. I don't know what we'd have done without him. We went on for a day and a night without any real rest at all. We all felt that the only thing we wanted to do was to get back here as soon as we could. When I reached the wood this morning, I was just limping along in a bad dream. I'm not really much better than poor old Strawberry, I'm afraid. He never complained, but he'll need a long rest, and I rather think I shall too. And Buckthorn, that's the second bad wound he's had. But that's not the worst now, is it? We've lost Hazel. The worst thing that could have happened. Some of you asked me earlier this evening if I would be Chief Rabbit. I'm glad to know you trust me, but I'm completely done in, and I can't possibly take it on yet. I feel as dry and empty as an autumn puffball. I feel as though the wind could blow my fur away. Chapter 28. At the Foot of the Hill. Marvelous happy it was to be, alone, and yet not solitary. Oh, out of terror and dark, to come in sight of home. Walter de la Mare, The Pilgrim. "You're not too tired to sylphlay, are you?" asked Dandelion. "And at the proper time of day for a change. It's a lovely evening, if my nose says right. We ought to try not to be more miserable than we can help, you know." "Just before we sylphlay," said Bigwig. "And I tell you, Holly, that I don't believe anyone else could have brought himself and 3 other rabbits safely back out of a place like that." "Frith meant us to get back," replied Holly. "That's the real reason why we're here." As he turned to follow Speedwell up the run that led into the wood, he found Clover beside him. "You and your friends must find it strange to go outside and eat grass," he said. "You'll get used to it, you know. And I can promise you that Hazel Raw was right when he told you it's a better life here than in a hutch. Come with me, and I'll show you a patch of nice short-tail grass, if Bigwig hasn't had it all while I've been away." Holly had taken to Clover. She seemed more robust and less timid than Boxwood and Haystack, and was evidently doing her best to adapt herself to Warren life. What her stock might be he could not tell, but she looked healthy. "Oh, I like it underground all right," said Clover, as they came up into the fresh air. "The closed space is really very much like a hutch, except that it's darker. The difficult thing for us is going to be feeding in the open. We're not used to being free to go where we like, and we don't know what to do. You all act so quickly, and half the time I don't know why. I'd prefer not to feed very far from the hole, if you don't mind." They moved slowly across the sunset grass, nibbling as they went. Clover was soon absorbed in feeding, but Holly stopped continually to sit up and sniff about him at the peaceful, empty down. When he noticed Bigwig, a little way off, staring fixedly to the north, he at once followed his gaze. "What is it?" he asked. "It's blackberry," replied Bigwig. He sounded relieved. Blackberry came hopping rather slowly down from the skyline. He looked tired out, but as soon as he saw the other rabbits he came on faster and made his way to Bigwig. "Where have you been?" asked Bigwig. "And where's Fiver? Wasn't he with you?" "Fiver's with Hazel," said Blackberry. "Hazel's alive. He's been wounded. It's hard to tell how badly, but he won't die." The other 3 rabbits looked at him speechlessly. Blackberry waited, enjoying the effect. "Hazel's alive?" said Bigwig. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure," said Blackberry. "He's at the foot of the hill at this very moment, in that ditch where you were the night Holly and Bluebell arrived." "I can hardly believe it," said Holly. "If it's true, it's the best news I've ever heard in my life. Blackberry, you really are sure? What happened? Tell us." "Fiver found him," said Blackberry. "Fiver took me with him nearly all the way back to the farm. Then he went along the ditch and found Hazel gone to ground up a land drain. He was very weak from loss of blood, and he couldn't get out of the drain by himself. We had to drag him around by his good hind leg. He couldn't turn round, you see." "But how on earth did Fiver know?" "How does Fiver know what he knows? You'd better ask him. When we got Hazel into the ditch, Fiver looked to see how badly he was hurt. He's got a nasty wound in one hind leg. but the bone isn't broken, and he's torn all along one side. But we cleaned up the places as well as we could, and then we started out to bring him back. It's taken us the whole evening. Can you imagine it? Daylight, dead silence, and a lame rabbit reeking of fresh blood. Luckily, it's been the hottest day we've had this summer. Not a mouse stirring. Time and again we had to take cover in the cow parsley and rest. I was all on the jump, but Fiver was like a butterfly on a stone. He sat in the grass and combed his ears. Don't get upset, he kept saying. There's nothing to worry about. We can take our time. After what I'd seen, I'd have believed him if he'd said we could hunt foxes. But when we got to the bottom of the hill, Hazel was completely finished, and he couldn't go any further. He and Fiver have taken shelter in the overgrown ditch, and I came on to tell you. And here I am. There was silence while Bigwig and Holly took in the news. At last, Bigwig said, "Will they stay there tonight?" "I think so," replied Blackberry. "I'm sure Hazel won't be able to manage the hill until he's a good deal stronger." "I'll go down there," said Bigwig. "I can help to make the ditch a bit more comfortable, and probably Fiver will be able to do with someone else to help to look after Hazel." "I should hurry then if I were you," said Blackberry. "The sun will be down soon." "Ha," said Bigwig. "If I meet a stoat, it had better look out, that's all. I'll bring you one back tomorrow, shall I?" He raced off and disappeared over the edge. "Let's go and get the others together," said Holly. "Come on, Blackberry. You'll have to tell the whole thing, from the beginning." The 3/4 of a mile in the blazing heat from Nuthanger to the foot of the hill had cost Hazel more pain and effort than anything in his life. If Fiver had not found him, he would have died in the drain. When Fiver's urging had penetrated his dark, ebbing stupor, he had at first actually tried not to respond. It was so much easier to remain where he was, on the far side of the suffering he had undergone. Later, when he found himself lying in the green gloom of the ditch, with Fiver searching his wounds and assuring him that he could stand and move, still he could not face the idea of setting out to return. His torn side throbbed, and the pain in his leg seemed to have affected his senses. He felt dizzy, and could not hear or smell properly. At last, when he understood that Fiver and Blackberry had risked a second journey to the farm, in the broadest of daylight, solely to find him and save his life, he forced himself to his feet and began to stumble down the slope to the road. His sight was swimming, and he had to stop again and again. Without Fiver's encouragement, he would have lain down once more and given up. In the road, he could not climb the bank and had to limp along the verge until he could crawl under a gate. Much later, as they came under the pylon line, he remembered the overgrown ditch at the foot of the hill and set himself to reach it. Once there, he lay down and at once returned to the sleep of total exhaustion. When Bigwig arrived, just before dark, he found Fiver snatching a quick feed in the long grass. It was out of the question to disturb Hazel by digging, and they spent the night crouched beside him on the narrow floor. Coming out in the gray light before dawn, the first creature Bigwig saw was Kihar, foraging between the elders. He stamped to attract his attention, and Kihar sailed across to him with one beat of his wings and a long glide. "Meester Pigwig, you find Meester Hazel?" "Yes," said Bigwig. "He's in the ditch here." "He not dead?" "No, but he's wounded, and very weak. The farm man shot him with a gun, you know." "You get black stones out?" "How do you mean?" "Always with gun. He's coming little black stones. You never see?" "No, I don't know about guns." take out black stones. He get better. He come now, yeah?" "I'll see," said Bigwig. He went down to Hazel and found him awake and talking to Fiver. When Bigwig told him that Kihar was outside, he dragged himself up the short run and into the grass. "This damn gun," said Kihar. "He put little stones for hurt you. I look, yeah?" "I suppose you'd better," said Hazel. "My leg's still very bad, I'm afraid." He lay down and Kihar's head flicked from side to side, as though he were looking for snails in Hazel's brown fur. He peered closely up the length of the torn flank. "He's not stone's ear," he said. "Go in, go out. No stop. Now I see you leg. Maybe hurt you. Not long." 2 shotgun pellets were buried in the muscle of the haunch. Kihar detected them by smell, and removed them exactly as he might have picked spiders out of a crack. Hazel had barely time to flinch before Bigwig was sniffing at the pellets in the grass. "Now is more bleed," said Kihar. "You stay, wait maybe 1, 2 day. Then good like before. And those rabbits up there, all wait for Mr. Hazel. I tell them, he come." He flew off before they could reply. As things turned out, Hazel stayed 3 days at the foot of the hill. The hot weather continued, and for much of the time he sat under the elder branches, dozing above ground like some solitary Hlessi, and feeling his strength returning. Fiver stayed with him, keeping the wounds clean and watching his recovery. Often they would say nothing for hours together, lying in the rough, warm grass while the shadows moved to evening, until at last the local blackbird cocked its tail and tucked away to roost. Neither spoke of Nuthanger Farm, but Hazel showed plainly enough that for the future Fiver, when he gave advice, would have no hard task to get him to accept it. "What would we have done without you?" said Hazel one evening. "We'd none of us be here, would we?" "You're sure we are here, then?" asked Fiver. "That's too mysterious for me," replied Hazel. "What do you mean?" "Well, there's another place, another country, isn't there? We go there when we sleep, at other times too, and when we die. Elorira comes and goes between the two as he wants, I suppose, but I could never quite make that out from the tales. Some rabbits will tell you it's all easy there, compared with the waking dangers that they understand, but I think that only shows they don't know much about it. It's a wild place, and very unsafe. And where are we really? There or here? Our bodies stay here. That's good enough for me. You'd better go and talk to that Silverweed fellow. He might know more." "Oh, you remember him? I felt that when we were listening to him, you know, he terrified me, and yet I knew that I understood him better than anyone else in that place. He knew where he belonged, and it wasn't here. Poor fellow. I'm sure he's dead. They'd got him, all right, the ones in that country. They don't give their secrets away for nothing, you know. But look, here come Holly and Blackberry, so we'd better feel sure we're here, just for the moment, anyway." Holly had already come down the hill on the previous day to see Hazel and tell again the story of his escape from a Fra-Fra. When he had spoken of his deliverance by the great apparition in the night, Fiver had listened attentively and asked one question. Did it make a noise? Later, when Holly had gone back, he told Hazel that he felt sure there was some natural explanation, though he had no idea what it could be. Hazel, however, had not been greatly interested. For him, the important thing was their disappointment, and the reason for it. Holly had achieved nothing, and this was entirely due to the unexpected unfriendliness of the Ifrafran rabbits. This evening, as soon as they had begun to feed, Hazel returned to the matter. "Holly," he said one night, "we're hardly any nearer to solving our problems, are we? You've done wonders, and we've nothing to show for it. And the nut-hanger raid was only a silly lark, I'm afraid, and an expensive one for me at that. The real hole has still got to be dug." "Well," said Holly, "you say it was only a lark, Hazel, but at least it gave us 2 does, and they're the only 2 we've got. Are they any good?" The kind of ideas that have become natural to many male human beings in thinking of females. Ideas of protection, fidelity, romantic love, and so on, are, of course, unknown to rabbits, although rabbits certainly do form exclusive attachments much more frequently than most people realize. However, they are not romantic, and it came naturally to Hazel and Holly to consider the 2 nut-hanger does simply as breeding stock for the warren. This was what they had risked their lives for. "Well, it's hard to say yet," replied Holly. "They're doing their best to settle down with us, Clover particularly. She seems very sensible. But they're extraordinarily helpless, you know. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm afraid they may turn out to be delicate in bad weather. They might survive next winter, and then again they might not. But you weren't to know that when you got them out of the farm. With a bit of luck, they might each have a litter before the winter," said Hazel. "I know the breeding season's over, but everything's so topsy-turvy with us here that there's no saying." "Well, you ask me what I think," said Holly. "I'll tell you. I think they're precious little to be the only thing between us and the end of everything we've managed to do so far. I think they may very well not have any kittens for some time, partly because this isn't the season, and partly because the life's so strange to them. And when they do, the kittens will very likely have a lot of this man-bred hutch stock in them. But what else is there to hope for? We must do the best we can with what we've got." "Has anyone mated with them yet?" asked Hazel. "No, neither of them has been ready so far. But I can see some fine old fights breaking out when they are." "That's another problem. We can't go on with nothing but these 2 does." "But what else can we do?" "I know what we've got to do," said Hazel, "but I still can't see how. We've got to go back and get some does out of Ifrafra." "You might as well say you were going to get them out of Inlay, Hazel Raw. I'm afraid I can't have given you a very clear description of Ifrafra." "Oh, yes you have. The whole idea scares me stiff. But we're going to do it. It can't be done. It can't be done by fighting or fair words, no. So it will have to be done by means of a trick. There's no trick will get the better of that lot, believe me. There are far more of them than there are of us. They're highly organized, and I'm only telling the truth when I say that they can fight, run, and follow a trail every bit as we can, and a lot of them much better." "The trick," said Hazel, turning to Blackberry, who all this time had been nibbling and listening in silence. "The trick will have to do 3 things. First, it will have to get the does out of Ifrafra, and secondly, it will have to put paid to the pursuit. For a pursuit there's bound to be, and we can't expect another miracle. But that's not all. Once we're clear of the palace, we've got to become impossible to find, beyond the reach of any wide patrol." "Yes," said Blackberry doubtfully. "Yes, I agree. To succeed, we should have to manage all those things." "Yes, and this trick, Blackberry, is going to be devised by you." The sweet carrion scent of dogwood filled the air. In the evening sunshine, the insects hummed around the dense white cymes hanging low above the grass. A pair of brown and orange beetles, disturbed by the feeding rabbits, took off from a grass stem and flew away, still coupled together. They mate. We don't, said Hazel, watching them go. A trick, Blackberry. A trick to put us right, once and for all. I can see how to do the first thing, said Blackberry. At least, I think I can. But it's dangerous. The other two I can't see at all yet, and I'd like to talk it over with Fiver. The sooner Fiver and I get back to the warren, the better, said Hazel. My leg's good enough now, but all the same I think we'll leave it for tonight. Good old Holly. Will you tell them that Fiver and I will come early tomorrow morning? It worries me to think that Bigwig and Silver may start fighting about Clover at any moment. Hazel, said Holly, listen, I don't like this idea of yours at all. I've been in Ifrafra, and you haven't. You're making a bad mistake, and you might very well get us all killed. It was Fiver who replied. It ought to feel like that, I know, he said. But somehow it doesn't. Not to me. I believe we can do it. Anyway, I'm sure Hazel's right when he says it's the only chance we've got. Suppose we go on talking about it for a bit. Not now, said Hazel. Time for underground down here. Come on. But if you two race up the hill, you'll probably be in time for some more sunshine at the top. Good night. Chapter 29. Return and Departure. He which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We would not die in that man's company, that fears his fellowship, die with us. Shakespeare, Henry V. Following morning all the rabbits were out at Silflay by dawn, and there was a good deal of excitement as they waited for Hazel. During the previous few days, Blackberry had had to repeat several times the story of the journey to the farm and the finding of Hazel in the drain. One or two had suggested that Kehar must have found Hazel and told Fiver secretly. But Kehar denied this, and when pressed, replied cryptically that Fiver was one who had traveled a good deal further than he had himself. As for Hazel, he had acquired, in everyone's eyes, a kind of magical quality. Of all the warren, Dandelion was the last rabbit to fail to do justice to a good story, and he had made the most of Hazel's heroic dash out of the ditch to save his friends from the farmers. No one had even suggested that Hazel might have been reckless in going to the farm. Against all odds, he had got them 2 does, and now he was bringing their luck back to the warren. Just before sunrise, Pipkin and Speedwell saw Fiver coming through the wet grass near the summit of the down. They ran out to meet him and waited with him until Hazel came up to them. Hazel was limping and had evidently found the climb a strain, but after resting and feeding for a short time, he was able to run down to the warren almost as fast as the others. The rabbits crowded round. Everyone wanted to touch him. He was sniffed and tussled with and rolled over in the grass until he felt almost as though he were being attacked. Human beings, on occasions of this kind, are usually full of questions, but the rabbits expressed their delight simply by proving to themselves, through their senses, that this was really Hazel Raw. It was all he could do to stand up to the rough play. I wonder what would happen if I lay down under it, he thought. They'd kick me out, I dare say. They wouldn't have a crippled chief rabbit. This is a test, as well as a welcome, even though they don't know it themselves. I'll test them, the rascals, before I'm done. He pushed Buckthorn and Speedwell off his back and broke away to the edge of the wood. Strawberry and Boxwood were on the bank, and he joined them and sat washing and combing himself in the sunrise. We can do with a few well-behaved fellows like you, he said to Boxwood. Look at that rough lot out there. They nearly finished me off. What on earth do you make of us? And how are you settling down now? Well, of course we find it strange, said Boxwood, but we're learning. Strawberry here has been helping me a great deal. We were just seeing how many smells I could tell on the wind, but that's something that'll only come slowly. The smells are awfully strong on a farm, you know, and they don't mean much when you live behind wire. As far as I can make out, you all live by smell. Don't take too many risks to begin with, said Hazel. Keep near the burrows. Don't go out alone. All that sort of thing. And how about you, Strawberry? Are you better? More or less, answered Strawberry. As long as I sleep a lot and sit in the sun, Hazel Raw. I've been terrified half out of my wits. That's the bottom of it. I've had the shivers and the horrors for days. I kept thinking I was back in Ifrafra. What was it like in Ifrafra? Asked Hazel. I'd rather die than go back there, said Strawberry, or risk going anywhere near it. I don't know which was worse, the boredom or the fear. All the same, he added after a few moments, there are rabbits there who'd be the same as we are, if they could only live naturally, like us. Several would be glad to leave the place if only they could. Before they went underground, Hazel talked to almost all of the rabbits. As he expected, they were disappointed over the failure at Ifrafra, and full of indignation at the ill treatment of Holly and his companions. More than one thought, like Holly, that the two does were likely to give rise to trouble. There should have been more, Hazel, said Bigwig. We shall all be at each other's throats, you know. I don't see how it's to be helped. Late in the afternoon, Hazel called everyone into the honeycomb. I've been thinking things over, he said. I know you must all have been really disappointed not to have got rid of me at Nuthanger Farm the other day, though I've decided to go a bit further next time. Where? Asked Bluebell. To Ifrafra, replied Hazel. If I can get anyone to come with me, and we shall bring back as many does as the warren needs. There were murmurs of astonishment, and then Speedwell asked, How? Blackberry and I have got a plan, said Hazel. But I'm not going to explain it now, for this reason. You all know that this is going to be a dangerous business. If any of you get caught and taken into a frafra, they'll make you talk all right. But those who don't know a plan can't give it away. I'll explain it later on, at the proper time. Are you going to need many rabbits, Hazel-Ra? Asked Dandelion. From all I hear, the whole lot of us wouldn't be enough to fight the Ifrafrans. I hope we shan't have to fight at all, replied Hazel. But there's always the possibility. Anyway, it'll be a long journey home with the does, and if by any chance we meet a wide patrol on the way, there have got to be enough of us to deal with them. Would we have to go into Ifrafra? Asked Pipkin timidly. No, said Hazel. We shall... I never thought, Hazel, interrupted Holly. I never thought that the time would come when I should feel obliged to speak against you. But I can only say again that this is likely to be a complete disaster. I know what you think. You're counting on General Woundwort not having anyone as clever as Blackberry and Fiver. You're quite right, I don't think he has. But the fact remains that no one can get a bunch of does away from that place. You all know that I've spent my life patrolling and tracking in the open. Well, there are rabbits in the Ifrafra who are better at it than I am. I'm admitting it. And they'll hunt you down with your does and kill you. Great Frith. We all have to meet our match some time or other. I know you want only to help us all, but do be sensible and give this scheme up. Believe me, the best thing to do with a place like Ifrafra is to stay as far away from it as possible. Talk broke out all over the honeycomb. That must be right. Who wants to be torn to pieces? That rabbit with the mutilated ears. Well, but Hazelraw must know what he's doing. I don't know, it's too far. Well, I don't want to go. Hazel waited patiently for quiet. At last, he said, It's like this. We can stay here and try to make the best of things as they are, or we can put them right once and for all. Of course there's a risk. Anyone knows that who's heard what happened to Holly and the others. But haven't we faced one risk after another? All the way from the Warren we left. What do you mean to do? Stay here and scratch each other's eyes out over 2 does? When there are plenty in Afrafra that you're afraid to go and get? Even though they'd be only too glad to come and join us. Someone called out, What does Fiver think? I'm certainly going, said Fiver quietly. Hazel's perfectly right, and there's nothing the matter with his plan. But I promise you this, all of you. If I do come, later on, to feel any kind of misgiving, I shan't keep it to myself. And if that happens, I shan't ignore it, said Hazel. There was silence. Then Bigwig spoke. You may as well all know that I'm going, he said. And we shall have Kihar with us, if that appeals to you. There was a buzz of surprise. Of course, there are some of us who ought to stay here, said Hazel. The farm rabbits can't be expected to go, and I'm not asking anyone who went the first time to go back again. I'll come, though, said Silver. I hate General Woundwort and his council with all my guts, and if we're really going to make fools of them, I want to be there. As long as I don't have to go back inside the place. That I couldn't face. But, after all, you're going to need someone who knows the way. I'll come, said Pipkin. Hazelraw saved I'm sure he knows what's... He became confused. Anyway, I'll come, he repeated, in a very nervous voice. There was a scuffling in the run that led down from the wood, and Hazel called. Who's that? It's I, Hazelraw. Blackberry. Blackberry, said Hazel. Why, I thought you'd been here all the time. Where have you been? Sorry not to have come before, said Blackberry. I've been talking to Kihar, as a matter of fact, about the plan. He's improved it a good deal, if I'm not mistaken. But General Woundwort's going to look remarkably silly before we've finished. I thought at first that it couldn't be done, but now I feel sure it can. Come where the grass is greener, said Bluebell, and the lettuces grow in rows, and a rabbit of free demeanor is known by his well-scratched nose. I think I shall have to come, just to satisfy my curiosity. I've been opening and shutting my mouth like a baby bird to know about this plan, and no one puts anything in. I suppose Bigwig's going to dress up as a hoodoo and drive all the does across the field. Hazel turned on him sharply. Bluebell sat up on his hind legs and said, Please, General Woundwort, sir, I'm only a little hoodoo, and I've left all my petrol on the grass. So if you wouldn't mind eating the grass, sir, well, I'd just give this lady a ride. Bluebell, said Hazel. Shut up. Oh, I'm sorry, Hazelraw, replied Bluebell in surprise. I didn't mean any harm. I was only trying to cheer everyone up a bit. After all, most of us feel frightened at the idea of going to this place, and you can't blame us, can you? It sounds horribly dangerous. Well, look here, said Hazel. We'll finish this meeting now. Let's wait and see what we decide. That's the rabbit's way. No one has to go to Ifrafra who doesn't want to, but it's clear enough that some of us mean to go. Now, I'm off to talk to Kihar myself. He found Kihar just inside the trees, snapping and tearing with his great beak at a foul-smelling piece of flaking brown flesh, which seemed to be hanging from a tracery of bones. He wrinkled his nose in disgust at the odor, which filled the wood around and was already attracting ants and bluebottles. "What on earth is that, Kihar?" he asked. "It smells appalling." "You not know? Him fish. Fish. Come from big water. Is good." "Come from big water? Did you find it there?" Nah, nah. Men have him. Down to farm. He's plenty big rubbish place. All things there. I go for food. Find him. All smell like big water. Pick him up. Bring him here. Make me think all about big water." He begins to tear again at the half-eaten kipper. Hazel sat choking with nausea and disgust as Kihar lifted it entire and beat it against a beech root so that small fragments flew round them. He collected himself and made an effort. "Kihar," he said, "Bigwig says you told him you'd come and help us to get the mothers out of the big warren." "Yeah, I come for you. Mr. Bigwig, he need me for help him. When he dare, he talk to me. I not rabbit. He's good, yeah?" "Yes, rather, it's the only possible way. You're a good friend to us, Kihar." Yeah, help you forget mothers. But now is this, Mr. Hazel. Always I want big water now. Always. He's hearing big water. Want to fly to big water. Now, soon you go get mothers. I help you. How you like. Then, when you getting mothers, I leave you there, or fly away, no come back. But I come back another time, yeah? Come in autumn, in winter. I come live here, with you, yeah? We shall miss you, Kihar, but when you come back we'll have a fine warren here, with lots of mothers. You'll be able to feel proud of all you did to help us. Yeah, we'll be so. But, Mr. Hazel, when you go? I want help you, but I no want wait for go big water. It's hard now for stay, you know. This what you do? Do him quick, yeah? Bigwig came up the run, put his head out of the hole and stopped in horror. "Earth up a tree," he said. "What a fearful smell. Did you kill it, Kihar, or did it die under a stone?" "You like, Mr. Big? I bring you nice little bit, yeah?" "Bigwig," said Hazel, "go and tell all the others that we're setting off at daybreak tomorrow. Holly will be chief rabbit here until we get back, and Buckthorn, Strawberry, and the farm rabbits are to stay with him. Anyone else who wants to stay will be perfectly free to do so." "Don't worry," said Bigwig. "I'll send them all up to Silflay with Kihar. They'll go anywhere you like before a duck can dive."